This is the second lesson in Unit 2 of Weimar and Nazi Germany, and this is based on the Munich Putsch. Now we are continuing to go down the route of the Nazis' rise to power, and in this second unit we're going to look at today of the Nazis' attempt to overthrow the Weimar Republic in 1923. So what was the Munich Putsch? So by 1923 the Nazis had been under the control of Hitler for around 2 years. And Hitler believed that the time was right to go against the government and try and take power by force. This wasn't the first time that the government had uprisings. So in 1919 they had the Spartacist uprising, which was the left-wing uprising, and in 1920 they had the Kapp Putsch. But they also had a range of political assassinations from 1919 to 1922. So this wasn't new for the government, but at the same time the Nazis were a real threat. Now today we need to understand, firstly, why did Hitler do it, the causes, look at the events, and then the consequences, the successes, and why it failed. So the causes of the Munich Putsch. There's lots of long-term and short-term problems here, but the key thing that you need to do is choose your top 3 reasons why you think Hitler went ahead with this. Now remember, in 1923, Germany were going through with the hyperinflation crisis. So Germany the Weimar Republic in particular, were in a really bad place in 1923. And I guess one reason the Nazi Party thought they could do it was they sort of hit the government while they're down. But these are some of the reasons that we've got. So firstly, during the hyperinflation crisis, the government seemed weak and unable to solve people's problems. The Nazis believed that they would offer the people as a better solution. Not just this, but the 5 years that the Weimar had been in control, 1918 to 23, there were lots of different grievances, such as the stab in the back, the Treaty of Versailles, reparations, loss of Germany's colonies. The anger had been building up, and the Nazi Party believed they would offer the people a solution, a saviour. In 1923, French troops entered the German industrial area of the Ruhr and took over German businesses, and when German workers resisted, they were arrested, imprisoned and deported. And this links to during 1923, hyperinflation in Germany hit its peak. Buying everyday goods became impossible and people lost their savings. So again, it goes back to the idea of Hitler hitting the government when they're down, hitting them when they are at their most vulnerable. Among some Germans there was deep resentment of the Weimar Republic, which created support for parties like the NSDAP. So what you'll notice is that when the government weren't doing so well, these extreme parties did better. People joined the Nazi Party. They had a significant amount of members by 1923. 50,000 members. Bear in mind, don't forget, in 1919 they had 23 members. So they went from 23 to 50,000 in the space of 4 years, which made them think that this was the time was right to actually start trying to overthrow the government. Some people also say that Hitler might have been trying to copy an individual in Italy called Benito Mussolini, who did exactly the same thing in Italy in 1922. They marched on Rome, forcing the democratic government of Italy to accept Mussolini as their leader. So Hitler believed that he could do exactly the same thing as Mussolini. So that's one thing that we could take into account, that Hitler might have been trying to copy someone who had already been successful in doing it. And then from 1919 to 1923, the NSDAP was growing massively in its Munich base in Bavaria. Now the Bavarian state government, leaders such as Gustav von Kahr, were no longer fans of the Weimar Republic, and they shared some of the Nazis' views and turned a blind eye to the violence of the SA. And this led to the membership growing to 50,000 by 1923. Now before I go into the events, we need to understand a couple of things. So number one, Hitler believed that he could get the Bavarian state government on his side. And he thought he could get people like Gustav von Kahr to support him. Now at the start, in 1922, Gustav von Kahr said he would support Hitler. However, by 1923, he backed out of that agreement. So Hitler and the Nazi Party were very much on their own. And this leads to the events of the Munich Putsch. Now before we go on to the events, the best thing to do would you go through and just write a short paragraph explaining your top 3 reasons why you think Hitler and the Nazi Party went ahead with this putsch. Pause the video, spend 5 minutes, and then move on to the next task. Right, so the events. We just need to have an understanding here of the key people. So it was the 8th and 9th of November 1923, and on the evening of the 8th, Bavarian government officials Lossow, Kahr and Caesar were meeting in a beer hall in Munich. And this is where Hitler burst in with 600 members of the SA. Brandishing a revolver, he shot it to the ceiling and declared that he was taking over Bavaria and later Germany. Now Hitler said that he had support of a man called Ludendorff, who we know from a previous lesson was the ex-leader of Germany during the First World War. And Hitler said that Ludendorff supported him and would become leader of the army. However, as we look at point 2, at gunpoint, Hitler demanded that the state leader should support him, and he had the support of General Ludendorff. They shook hands in agreement, but the problem was Ludendorff wasn't there yet. Another reason why you could say that they agreed with it is because Hitler had them at gunpoint. Now while this was all happening, Röhm and the SA took over the local police and army headquarters in Bavaria. However, the main army barracks remained in the hands of the army officers who were loyal to the government. So there was, if you didn't get the army barracks, then people could still fight back, which is what happened. Where the first march went ahead, they were pushed back because the army officers actually managed to hear about this. But why? Ludendorff arrived 7 hours late. He arrived at around 3:20 in the morning. And once he arrived, he actually let Lossow and Kahr go, whilst Hitler was elsewhere, because Lossow and Kahr said they had to check on their concerned wives. Ludendorff believed by letting them go they wouldn't do anything, but Lossow and Kahr went to inform the army. So at 5 AM on the 9th of November, Hitler and his supporters gathered to launch their attack on the streets of Munich. It became clear that the 3 leaders, Lossow, Kahr and Caesar, withdrew their support and decided to put down the uprising. At about midday on the 9th of November, Hitler, Ludendorff, Goering, Röhm, Streicher, 1,000 stormtroopers and 2,000 volunteer supporters marched on the town centre to declare Hitler the new president of Germany. However, they were met with the state police and the army, and they opened fire. Hitler and Goering were injured, whilst 14 Nazis and 4 policemen were killed. Ludendorff, Röhm and Streicher were all arrested, while Goering escaped and went into hiding. Hitler fled in a car, hid at a friend's house, and was later found hiding in a wardrobe and arrested 2 days later on the 11th of November. So they're the events of the Munich Putsch. Now a couple of things it doesn't mention here. Firstly, on the day of the Putsch it was snowing. And secondly, the Nazis did actually have weapons provided to them. However, the 2,000 guns they were provided with actually had broken firing pins. So most of the weapons that the Nazis had didn't actually fire. So we need to look at the consequences. Hitler was going to go on trial for treason. But we need to look at why it was a failure and why it was a success. And then you need to think about, on balance, do you think that the Munich Putsch was more of a success or a failure for the Nazis, and why? And I will just give you an idea here. On the short term it was a failure because they didn't conquer the government. In the long term it was a success because Hitler used the trial as a form of propaganda against the Weimar that lots of people actually tended to agree with. So, we'll go through each of these and you need to decide if it suggests a success or a failure. So Ludendorff had a huge impact on Hitler's plans. He turned up 7 hours late as he doubted Hitler going through with the putsch. He also allowed Lossow and Kahr to go home. This meant they informed the local army to prepare them for the Nazis' arrival in Munich. Well, this is going to be a reason for failure, because Ludendorff made many errors. Due to the putsch, the Nazi Party was banned. Not only this, but things were so good in Germany in the years 24 to 28, extreme parties lost support and moderate parties gained support. Well, this is a huge failure. The fact that the Nazi Party were banned, and the fact that they weren't actually going to get into power because Germany were going through the golden years from 1924. The weather conditions on the 9th were snowy, making it difficult to march to take place. While due to the delay of the march, it allowed the local police to prepare. Another reason for failure. The Nazis didn't take into account the weather conditions, and they didn't have a plan B. Hitler was put on trial for treason. He should have got life in prison. The judge sympathised with Hitler because he was a right-wing judge. Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, but he was released after 9 months. His time was comfortable. He wrote Mein Kampf while he was in prison, which contained his political ideas and inspired the Nazi Party when they could reorganise later on. This is a big success, because Hitler should have been put away for life, but he didn't, and he spent a lot of time in prison, still running the Nazi Party, even though they were banned. He was preparing them for the future. 2,000 rifles that the Nazis had for them had faulty firing pins, meaning they had no real weaponry to fight back. It's going to be a failure. When Hitler went on trial, he used it to criticise the government. People listened, and newspapers were reporting on Hitler's oracy skills. People believed Hitler and his criticisms. Hitler became like a local celebrity during this. People knew him. People knew the name of Adolf Hitler. Hitler didn't have a plan B. The fact that Ludendorff was so late meant that Hitler had to make a decision to either back out or continue. Backing out would have looked like a huge failure. Well, this is a failure because he didn't have a plan of it going wrong. In prison, Hitler realised that he needed a new strategy to gain power. A violent uprising had failed, so he needed to build a party and use democracy, which he hated, to win power. Hitler decided on legality, to gain power legally through getting votes. This is a success because it helps Hitler re-emerge and reorganise the party to try and get votes legally, which means he gets power properly. And Hitler was arrested 48 hours after the events of the putsch. He was put on trial for treason. Failure. But actually some people in the past have said that's a success because he turned the trial into basically a sideshow. Now you've got these reasons here. Write your short paragraph. Was the Munich Putsch a success or failure for Hitler? Okay? So on balance, do you feel that the Munich Putsch was more of a success or failure? And once you've done that, that is your lesson on the Munich Putsch.